So the way that we're looking at it is essentially building Conex as an extension to their business. So yes, I understand fully that SMEs are very, very busy. They've got an awful lot going on. As you say, it is quite lonely for these directors of these companies. They're incredibly busy. They're being pulled all over the place with all sorts of things going on. Plenty of work, plenty of opportunities, but they're also struggling with skills, struggling with energy, struggling with all of these other things that are constantly going on. So we're trying to act as that kind of extension, so they don't necessarily have to go out and find places where they can learn about certain things related to their business. They don't have to go out and do that themselves and learn about it. They've just got to basically keep an eye on the information we're putting out there. If it's of interest, if it's a specific challenge they're facing, then we're going to be putting on events, we're going to be talking around it, we're going to be encouraging this conversation. Look beyond their kind of normal day-to-day. Think past this process of we're just doing it the way it's always been done, and actually try and make a little bit of a difference, try and make a meaningful change to the business. Connect with someone new, give them 5-10 minutes of your time, learn around what they do as a business, because one conversation can genuinely change the direction of your business, and I do honestly believe that.
In this month's episode of Made to Grow, the podcast custom made for SME manufacturers, I'm speaking with Sam Baynham, MD of Conex Portal, a UK-wide community dedicated to connecting and empowering SME manufacturers and engineering companies. We discuss the role that growing manufacturers can play in supporting each other, sharing best practices and even connecting buyers to suppliers. We also touched on some of the key challenges facing the sector, such as the manufacturing skills shortage and the uphill struggle of digital transformation for small businesses. Sam has plenty of insights and experience to share through his work with Conex, so let's jump right in. Welcome, Sam Baynham, to the Made to Grow podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Very good to be here.
You're welcome. So, followers on social media, may be aware of you. Your reputation may precede you, because you're very active, and Conex Portal is very active in terms of the UK manufacturing scene, and the content that you produce on LinkedIn is excellent. But for those that don't know you and what Conex is about, can you give us a wee bit of background and elaborate on Conex?
Of course. So Conex itself is a community to connect manufacturers, ultimately. So we work with a host of manufacturers, engineers, designers all across the UK, and offer them better ways to connect, better ways to collaborate amongst themselves, ultimately. So my background is mechanical engineering. I've got a mechanical engineering degree from Leeds University, and then worked in the Autodesk kind of environment, supporting customers with their software and training needs. Left there about 6 or so years ago to start up on my own as a kind of freelance design engineer, and was working very much with small businesses, individuals with ideas, and helping them through that kind of design to market process, which is very good, very enjoyable. Learned a lot through that process, but one thing I did learn is that there's little connectivity between that design and manufacturing world. It was very hard when you get the project to a point where you're ready to go to small scale manufacturer. Very hard to find the right connections, I found. So set up my own way of connecting people. So that's where kind of Conex formed ultimately, through a need to connect more manufacturers and bring more of this kind of SME sector together. And ultimately have built some brilliant connections, brilliant kind of colleagues around this kind of movement, if you like, to support UK manufacturing a little bit better, which is why we're very active on LinkedIn, talking around various things going on in the sector. But I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later on in terms of a kind of sales and supporting platform.
I know it's great whenever necessity is the mother of invention. So whenever you see that gap in the market, and you've done a fantastic job of turning that idea and that opportunity into something really really valuable. You have members around the UK of different kinds of manufacturing. What kind of manufacturing and design, and I suppose the other supporting kind of ecosystem that's there as well. Like what kind of collaborative benefits have companies seen? And I appreciate you can't probably divulge specific examples, but the kind of things that get the juices going for our listeners.
Yes, ultimately we're there for our members to essentially open the door into a big pool of knowledge is the best way to look at it. It's not a sales platform. We're not there to directly sell to one another. We're there to genuinely build these relationships, build connections, and look to support one another. So there's lots of kind of new innovations, new products, new ideas, people genuinely just asking for a little bit of help here and there. And that's the kind of attitude that we're trying to bring, the ethos that we're trying to bring into it is very much support one another. Ultimately, they'll then be there to support you when you need help. So, as you've kind of touched on, a lot of the projects themselves that are shared between members are obviously under NDA, and there's an interesting kind of level of confidentiality that we have to reach, which is obviously one of the biggest barriers in starting this. Sharing the connections and sharing the case studies is quite hard when they can't necessarily talk about themselves, but that's a wider challenge, I think, for manufacturing in general as well. So there are plenty of opportunities. So we kind of split it into two, really. So you've got the kind of marketing opportunities. So opportunities for members to actually share what they're doing to a bit of a wider platform rather than just themselves. So there's all sorts of things that we're doing. So there's podcasts, webinars, mastermind sessions. We're quite prevalent at kind of trade shows, exhibitions like that. Article opportunities, so media publications contacting us saying that we want to speak to some of your members and learn around what's actually going on in the real manufacturing sector, as I call it, the SME world. Blogs, training courses, interviews, all sorts of stuff like that for members to actually shout a little bit louder collaboratively around what they're doing, which in itself is something that wouldn't necessarily happen if they were just working by themselves trying to get a little bit of traction for their business. Whereas we've got this kind of grounding board, if you like, where people can start to shout together collaboratively to perceive what's kind of going on, what's really going on in the sector. So that's a kind of marketing element to it, if you like. But then obviously the project element, we've had members talk around tooling design projects, CNC projects, loads of 3D printing ideas have shared. People coming to us with initial kind of concept ideas. The stage that I was essentially in with my clients in the early days, people can now bring those sorts of projects to us, and we can have a open discussion as a group to kind of support those projects moving forward, discuss the best manufacturing processes, discuss the companies that they need to be speaking to, and really drive those innovations and those ideas forward, rather than just ultimately giving them a little bit of guesswork here and there and thinking that they know the best solution, but they don't have that advice and that expertise to actually know if it is the best solution. So, for example, we had a client come to us recently saying that they wanted to injection mold a load of parts, whereas when we actually dug into that as a bit of a group, found out that it's probably better to initially 3D print the components for the first batch to get the prototypes to test out on the market, and then look at the further tooling and cost implications to actually mass producing this component. And that wouldn't have happened without this kind of collaborative group. So ultimately, yeah, it's bringing people together, having discussions, and therefore sharing skills and best practice to support one another.
I mean, I have a sort of a similar experience with a group of CEOs who it's a sort of cluster of mainly software, but all other kind of high tech and scaling companies based here in Belfast. And we're not there, as you say, to sell to each other, which is great. But the brain trust is there. So if you if you're not sure about something, we have a WhatsApp group that is pinging usually a lot more at the weekend when people are have some downtime and they've some ideas or they're thinking about something, and it could be anything from that kind of marketing side of things, pricing strategy, HR issues, contractual issues, and there usually turns out to be somebody who has been there and done it and got the t-shirt or probably the scars on their back, to and you can just avoid that, or at least bring some of that experience into your own context. So I imagine that example of that prototyping, using 3D printing. Somebody's probably been there and learnt the hard way, and they've saved that other member a lot of heartache. I mean, the point about the sort of trust and confidentiality one is an interesting one. Is it difficult to bring new people into the group? And how do you sort of create that kind of playing field where people know that this what's presumably what is said behind closed doors stays behind closed doors.
Exactly that. We did a little bit of feedback gathering at the end of last year, asking what members valued most out of being part of the community, and the highest answer was that safe space, that kind of family feel, that supportive network, that knowledge that what they do share is treated confidential. We get a lot of stuff. Obviously, pretty much everyone's on LinkedIn these days. You see there's a lot of good content on there, but there's also a lot of pitching and selling and repeated content from similar people posting the same thing multiple times a week. And we've tried to remove that kind of overly selling and pitching kind of attitude from the group, for that exact reason, because I've seen it on LinkedIn and it works in rare occasions, but most of the time that those sorts of posts don't actually get that much traction. So the idea is that we're not positioning it as a sales tool. We're positioning it as a collaborative environment where people can actually build relationships with one another, have solid conversations, and ultimately support themselves and their wider business and the sector. There is a much wider network beyond the Conex network. We've got about 200 individuals on our platform at the moment, and each of those, as an absolute minimum, are probably connected to another 500 to 1,000 on LinkedIn. So add up those numbers, and suddenly you've got a very wide-reaching network of quite like-minded people. And that's the attitude that we're trying to kind of bring to the surface a little bit. Actually ask questions, ask when you need help, and therefore you'll kind of find some of those answers within the group. As you say, people are most likely to have been through it, got the scars, realised the kind of pitfalls in some of these processes, and therefore by asking that question, a question that you probably wouldn't ask on LinkedIn. There's certain things that you don't want to share publicly around your business that you can't really put on a public platform like LinkedIn. But by giving them that opportunity to put it on our kind of closed members area, actually gives them that place to share some of these challenges and get genuine help back from the rest of the group.
Excellent. I know from firsthand how important that is, because I think with SMEs, you're typically it's lonely at the top. Like, I'm lucky to have a really strong team around me. But even that point about the network, we're inside our own bubble, as every company tends to be, and you've got your customers and the people you do business with. But it's those sort of external connections and those multiplier effects, that being able to tap in to somebody else's network, be it Connex or maybe through the likes of the Smart Manufacturing Data Hub or some of the the academic kind of networks, or the catapults, that that's where the good stuff happens. So one thing, how do you encourage um, manufacturers to kind of raise their head above the parapet, to explore the possibilities of collaboration more?
The way that I look at it is building that kind of familiarity between members breeds that kind of confidence, and the more you engage, the more you're ultimately going to get out of it.
Yeah,
There is, yes, there is an engagement piece. You do have to attend some events. You do have to post questions. You do have to make the effort to actually talk to other people. Um, you can sit in the background. You can read the information. You can read the data that's coming out. If that's the way that you want to approach it, absolutely fine. But to get real value and to really see things moving forward, we need to build this kind of familiarity between members. We all know people, no matter what people say around COVID and what happened, people still ultimately deal with people, and they want to actually meet people. They want to engage. They want that kind of human level of interaction, and that's going to drive businesses forward, especially into the future. So we're essentially opening the door for members. We're encouraging them to meet one another. We're encouraging them to talk to each other often, build that familiarity, and which will ultimately grow their business, because you never know when you're going to need so and so working in the local machine shop a few miles
yeah,
from your house. Like you don't know when you need them until you've got that challenge. And by building that familiarity, building that relationship with you, they're more likely to actually help you when you need that help. Um, so the way that we're looking at it is essentially building Connex as an extension to their business. So yes, I understand fully that SMEs are very, very busy. They've got an awful lot going on. As you say, it is quite lonely for these directors of these companies. They're incredibly busy. They're being pulled all over the place with all sorts of things going on. Plenty of work, plenty of opportunities, but they're also struggling with skills, struggling with energy, struggling with all of these other things that are constantly going on. So we're trying to act as that kind of extension, so they don't necessarily have to go out and find places where they can learn about certain things related to their business, new services, new opportunities, energy issues. They don't have to go out and do that themselves and learn about it. They've just got to basically keep an eye on the
hmm
information we're putting out there. If it's of interest, if it's a specific challenge they're facing, then we're going to be putting on events. We're going to be talking around it. We're going to be encouraging this conversation. So it's kind of acting as that. You don't necessarily have to do that bit of research. We're doing it for them.
yeah,
Um, and the same for the sales side of things. Ultimately, people want to grow their business. They want to bring in more clients. They want to bring in more customers. The more we get to know about their business, the more opportunities we're going to be able to find for them. So yeah, so it. There is a time requirement, but the more they put in, ultimately, the more we'll be able to give them, and more they'll get out of it.
The Made to Grow podcast is brought to you by FlowLens, the simple, affordable MRP system specifically designed for SME device, equipment, and machinery manufacturers. Our top-rated cloud-based software can help you cut down on wasted materials, time, and money, and eliminate the chaos of running your manufacturing with spreadsheets and hope. Our customers have reported savings of over a day per week per person in their business by cutting out needless admin, duplication of work, and countless mistakes. Plus, lead times are shortened by up to 75%. And after hundreds of successful implementations, we've got the blueprint for manufacturing success nailed down. Head over to flowlens.com for a quick video tour of the software and to hear from more manufacturers like you who have transformed their businesses with FlowLens. Now, back to the interview. Yeah, I think it's you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So um, you need to be open to these kinds of things, and maybe not curious, but also not have specific expectations, because I think whenever you're part of a network, some of the things that you get out of it, you'll never have expected to get out of it. So you mentioned events. We were at a CEO retreat a few months ago, and just the kind of ability to connect with other people who have either are at the same stage as you, or maybe a bit further on, and understand, the kind of problems that they have faced are the same problems that you have. Is reassuring. And not only that, you have somebody who's got the experience who can maybe give you some advice, point you in the right direction of an advisor, or a resource, and you're not kind of left in the dark, so it doesn't just stay on the too hard pile. So we've found a lot of that, particularly with AI and machine learning opportunities, to bring the sort of MRP software into the 21st century. So at the minute, like, what kind of key challenges do you see the SME manufacturer facing? You mentioned a few in passing there a minute ago. It'd be good to sort of tease those out, and where Conex or collaboration in general can help deal with those issues.
The big one is skills and encouraging more young engineers into the sector, in my opinion. I know there are some potentially bigger short-term challenges that people are facing with rising costs and energy and all of those sorts of things. I understand that they are very, very difficult to deal with at the minute. I completely get that. But if we don't support enough new engineers into the sector, and if we don't encourage enough of this younger generation, or even existing people out in the workforce, to transition into an engineering career, there is going to be no manufacturing. If we don't have the people that can be part of these businesses moving forward, then the business isn't going to exist ultimately. So it's not a quick win. It's not a quick fix. It's not something that we can just turn around and say, right, we all need to do this starting tomorrow, and then we're going to suddenly have 20,000 new engineers starting in the business in the next 3 or 4 years. It's not that easy. It's a very long process that needs to be worked out, and it's a very much a kind of incremental, step by step. If everyone can do something on a daily, weekly basis to help and to just think around the younger generation, the better. So we're trying to educate potentially more parents into what a career in manufacturing looks like. We're speaking to more teachers around what a career for their students could look like. We're ultimately trying to get in front of as many students as we can to explain what manufacturing really is. It's not this dirty, oily, greasy environment that's and not a nice place to work, poor wages, minimum wage, all that. It's not that at all. In fact, it's completely the opposite. It's the most high-tech, high-powered sector in the UK. It's really flourishing, and it's really exciting to actually be part of. It's just trying to get that message across so more people, people go through graduate schemes, through after university. There's either a path of you go to school, you go to college, you go to uni. Once you come out of that college, once you come out of that education system, the process at the moment is very much apply for these big graduate schemes at all these very well-known large organizations. Hugely competitive. What happens if you don't get that role? Most of those people go into a completely different sector. They think, well, I've tried engineering, I've tried manufacturing, I didn't get the role I wanted, so I'm going to go do something else. And that's a huge pool of wasted talent that we're just ultimately forgetting about. So trying to filter some of that down into the SMEs. The SMEs are the ones with the skills gaps. The SMEs are the ones which are super busy but at capacity and trying to grow, but struggling to find the skills and the staff to actually grow. So some of those, they're not bad engineers because they didn't get into the Rolls-Royce graduate scheme by any means. They're just, they need to be positioned they need to be given another opportunity, basically.
And is the schools kind of outreach, is that part of what you you do then with Connex? Do you have is that a work stream that you have ongoing?
So we did so each of our events, so every month that we do events, we do a different structure and a different theme every month. So we usually partner with another company, an expert in certain fields, bring them in to host a few sessions, get them talking to the members. Some of them are members themselves, talking around what they kind of specialize in as a service offering. And back in February, our focus was skills gap and education. So we worked very closely with Angela from Marvelous Manufacturing. And yeah, as a group,
former podcast guest,
brilliant.
Made the Grow.
And yeah, we actually went to one of her local schools. So we went in with her, with I think 6 or 7 of our members, and then another 7 or 8 logged into a Zoom call at the same time. Spoke to a group of students, talked to them about manufacturing, talked to them about opportunities, and most of them didn't really know what manufacturing was before we started talking. And we had 3D scanners there, we had printers, we had demos. We had one of our members actually working on the Zoom call, but he was actually in his facility doing work during the process. So they were just sat there watching him work on all of his composite systems and stuff in the background. And it's just a real life example of how some of these things work and some of the opportunities. And yeah, they all left thinking, okay, that's definitely something that I can think of and now look into.
Because I think teachers probably just don't have any context. Everyone understands what a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor does. So those are kind of obvious careers to push people towards, many of which are potentially going to be eaten up by AI as well. But yeah, the manufacturing remains a wee bit opaque. So bringing it to life like that, I think, is the only way to kind of inspire people.
Yeah.
So, because certainly, yeah, it's a viable and fascinating and rewarding career. As you say, it's not a down and dirty, oily, bolting things together. Yes, there are assembly lines, but most assembly line situations are becoming more and more focused on value add and you know um, kind of skills that are sought after. So um,
Mm.
that makes a lot of sense to be able to advocate on behalf
Yeah.
of the group, to be able to do that, because it's a wee bit of a where do you start kind of problem, when government obviously needs to be doing its bit and you know inspiring, and sort of facilitating it
It's
through.
it's just doing things a little bit differently to what's been done before. Like, when was the last time the education system was radically changed? It's very much, you go to school, you go to college, you memorize, you learn, you remember things to pass exams, which then opens doors to the next level of education, which then opens doors to potentially university if that's the way that your school's directing you. There's no other real option. There's no other kind of knowledge given to them as a kind of career path after that. It's, you get your grades, you get your piece of paper that says you're smart, it says you're good at what you're doing, but then what? There's no further education. There's no kind of support through what a real job looks like. There's no kind of financial planning advice. There's no real world experiences in that side of education.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you get the odd example where certain schools, certain teachers are brilliant at it, and they will actively engage, and they will make sure their students are learning, and they will make sure that they're taking them to the right places, and they're taking them into interesting facilities and things like that, and that's great. But it's not the done thing. It's not the known thing by the majority of the system, and it's
Yeah,
something that needs to change. But it's a huge issue.
you hit the nail on the head there. They're sort of teaching them to memorize information rather than to be creative and use the information and skills that they do develop creatively to add value, which is frustrating. Question on the campaign for a Minister for Manufacturing. Do you think that would make a big impact on this?
I believe that campaign, it would give SMEs a voice ultimately. So this isn't the only challenge SMEs are facing. There are other issues out there. There are funding issues. There are working with larger organisations. All the large primes, all the OEMs have said that, or they've been told that they need to work with more SMEs, but there's no real process to do that. There's just an expectation that an SME can handle the same onboarding process as one of their tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, and that's just completely wrong. There needs to be a better thought out plan, a better thought out process to the whole system and the whole supply chain if we are going to really support UK manufacturing. It's still going up the world rankings. We're the 8th largest manufacturing nation in the world. There's still plenty going on. You speak to the general public, you speak to someone on the street, and the general perception is no, manufacturing, that's not done in this country. We send it all over to the Far East, don't we? We don't make things here anymore, which is rubbish. And I think having a voice in government in some capacity will actually help spread the word around what some of the manufacturers are doing. Hopefully it will build a bit more of a positive perception in media. It will spread the funding a little bit more evenly to the right companies. Yes, there's plenty of funding, plenty of opportunities out there, but it's so hard for SMEs to tap into because there's such a big time and resource requirement to actually access it that most of them just aren't able to do it. So hopefully some of those issues, some of those skills, some of those problems will start to actually get the ear of the right people in government if there is some sort of minister or representative with that as their full-time role.
Exactly. If there's somebody around the cabinet table advocating for the sector, provided they don't just completely ignore SMEs and focus on the needs of the tier ones, then how that influences more joined up thinking between particularly education and sort of economy and overseas endeavors, that needs a more joined up strategy. So well, let's hope it doesn't fall on deaf ears.
It's definitely getting some traction, which is nice to see. It needs more support, but ultimately SMEs are very busy, very time poor. They don't have much resource. They don't have much time to allocate. It's going to be a challenge. But hopefully the conversations are having. There is more manufacturing coverage in the media. It is moving in the right direction. It's just I don't think it's quite where it needs to be yet.
So unfortunately, Sam, we've run out of time. We could chat further about a lot of those topics. Just to wrap up, first of all, how do people get in touch with yourself and look at what Conex has to offer in more detail and get involved?
Of course. Easiest place to find info on Conex is our website, which is Conex-Portal, one N in Conex, Conex, or my personal LinkedIn page, which I'm assuming you'll share out with
we will,
alongside the podcast here. But it's just Sam Baynham on LinkedIn. You can find everything there.
Good stuff. And just to conclude, if you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice, what would it be?
I would encourage people to look beyond their kind of normal day to day. So think past this process of we're just doing it the way it's always been done, and actually try and make a little bit of a difference, try and make a meaningful change to the business. Connect with someone new, give them 5-10 minutes of your time, learn around what they do as a business, because one conversation can genuinely change the direction of your business. And I do honestly believe that. Have that one conversation with that one person, and you never know what doors that could open up.
100%. Think radically about your business and exploit the networks that you don't even know are there.
Exactly.
So, brilliant. Well, thanks again, Sam. I really appreciate your time and all of the insights that we've sort of garnered today. So, look forward to bumping into you at an event soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we'll be at the NEC at some point soon. Advanced engineering is the next one that Conex are exhibiting at in October, but we'll be present at all of the others throughout the year as well.
Brilliant. We'll see you there, if not before.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers, not at all. Take care. Thanks so much to Sam for joining us on this episode and sharing his insights into manufacturing growth through collaboration. With so much media attention, and it seems often government support focused on Tier 1 manufacturers, it's fantastic to hear how organisations like Conex are highlighting the incredible work and exciting opportunities presented by SMEs. In next week's episode, I'm talking to Oliver Kont of JCS Nuclear Solutions. JCS embarked on an ambitious digital transformation project back in 2020 that has paved the way for significant new opportunities and even bigger customers. We discuss this journey in what will be a fascinating lesson for other manufacturers who want to unlock their potential through digital tools and automation. Until next time.